So I had a very unique childhood. I grew up living on a boat in the Puget Sound, and I'm going to tell you about it. So in the summer of 1980, I came home from school. It was the summer between 6th grade and 7th grade. So back then that would have been the last year of elementary school, getting ready to go into junior high. And I was 6 years behind all of my siblings. And so that would have been the year that the next child up was graduating high school. And at the time we had a 42-foot Chris Graph. And we did, summer trips, weekend trips, that kind of thing. And I came home from school and my dad was there and he says, "Kim, pack a bag. We're going to go move on the boat for the summer." And I was like, okay, I love the boat. Sounded like a great idea. I think I had just lost one of my pets. He had gotten hit by a car, so I was kind of sad about that. And so this was great. So my mom, my father, and I packed our bags and we moved down to the boat, which was probably about 35 minutes from the house down on the water. And we left my older sisters at the house. Talk about mom and dad running away from home. But here's the thing. We never went back. I was on that boat with my folks until I got married. Graduated high school and got married. So I was on that boat with them for 6, almost 7 years. Oh, not the same boat. We ended up with another boat in between. We were on the 42-footer for a couple years, and then we bought a 46-foot Chris Craft named the Scorpio, and we lived on that. And it was awesome. It was awesome. So you would think a kid, how are you going to entertain yourself living on a boat? Well, I was always kind of a loner kid anyway, because like I said, my siblings were quite a bit older than me, so I was really good at entertaining myself. I mean, I had 1 or 2 little friends in the neighborhood, but for the most part, I could entertain myself for hours. And once we moved on the boat, I still did my crafts and things like that I enjoyed doing, but I had a pair of roller skates and I would go up in the parking lot and skate for hours. I got so good at roller skating. I would ride my bicycle around. The boat had a skiff that was a sailboat. It was like a 10-footer. It was a pretty decent size little sailboat. And I would sail that up and down the channel and, out into the bay. And when I got a little older in high school and we had switched from the 42 to the 46, then I had a little speedboat skiff and I would take that. So this is why I probably get bouts of skin cancer. I would take the skiff full blast out into the middle of the bay, lather myself up with the, baby oil, as we all did. I had my boom box, blast the music out there because no one cared. I'm out there all by myself in the middle of the bay, lay there until, I got hot, and then jump into the bay, cool off, get back up on the skiff and lay there in the sun all day. And I'd have friends over once in a while to spend the weekend and that kind of thing. And so yeah, I entertained myself. There were other kids on the dock. So the dock we lived on was a single pier, and it probably had maybe 20 boats, 25 boats on the pier. And out of those boats, probably 6 or 7 of them were other families that lived on board. And so there were other kids, some were older, some were younger. And I had a couple of them that were right in my age group. And so we would race our skiffs or our sailboats or whatever down the channel, and we'd play games or we'd hang out, so it was like a little neighborhood. It was cool. Now, laundry and showers was always more work. And by the time, we moved on the boat, I was going on 12. And so I was expected to help out. And there was a laundromat at the top of the ramp, because this is saltwater, so the ramp would go up and down with the tide. And, I'd have to haul that laundry up to the laundromat and do laundry and keep a timer. And then there was a shower on the boat, on both of them, but only in the master's stateroom, in the captain's stateroom. So I didn't have a shower at my end. And so I would have to walk up the ramp early in the morning and take a shower. There was one up in the public restroom. And yeah, so it was a little bit of a challenge, but you just kind of got used to it. And I think that's why RV life for me is not a stretch. It's not a stretch. I'm used to water pumps. I'm used to conserving energy. I'm used to all the things that go with living on a boat. And so when I moved in the RV, it just kind of came naturally. The worst part about the ramp, though, is in the winters, it would get icy and slippery, and you would be hanging on to that ramp for dear life as you would go down, down to get to the boat. Speaking of the roller skates, so my mom would have a heart attack, and I probably would at this point in my life, now that I'm older and wiser too, but I would roller skate up in the parking lot, and then I would come down the ramp. It had little niches in it, and I would toe walk down the ramp in my skates and then skate down the dock to the boat. And she's like, you realize if you fall in, those are like weights and you're gonna sink. But you know what? I was 12, 13 years old. I was invincible. I'm not gonna fall in. I'm not gonna sink. What are you talking about? You don't know anything. But among my chores was, the laundry, the washing the boat, the filling the water tank. I had chores just like everybody else. I had to clean inside and that kind of thing. And I remember one time my girlfriend and I almost sank the boat because I put the hose in the tank to fill it, which was back in, you lifted up these hatches, and the tank sat in the transom of the boat. And I stuck the hose in there, turned it on, and went inside. Well, it usually took about 15-20 minutes to fill the tank if it was really low, and we sat down and started playing cards. Forgot all about it. And we weren't really moving around, so the boat was just kind of sitting there. I can't remember if it was my mom, I think it was my dad came home, and he stepped on the side of the boat to get in, and the boat listed, and it stayed there because the bilge was full of water. And he immediately, oh my God, what's happening? And we realized what had happened. Oh yeah, I got my booty chewed on that one for not paying attention to what was going on. And the bilge pump could barely keep up. We got it all worked out, but oh my gosh, this is why you don't leave kids to do stuff. Don't leave them alone. And I also, besides all the chores I had, there was a boat across the dock from us, about the same size as our boat, and it was a family. It was a mom and a dad and 2 little boys. And the boys were, I think, 3 and 4. They weren't old enough to be in school, but they were talking and getting around, and there was no diapers. So they must have been about 3 and 4. I don't think they were diapers. But anyway, here I am, 12, 13 years old. The parents left me to babysit their children all day on the boat while they went to work. And I would go in and, hang out with the kids on their boat. And I didn't take them off the boat or anything because it's like, I didn't want anybody to fall in on my watch. But, I'd clean up and do their dishes and things like that during the day and watch TV with them or whatever. I mean, this is way back before VHS or I think we had maybe 3 or 4 channels. We'd watch Sesame Street or whatever. But those were long days. Babysitting days were long days. I think it was only a couple days a week for 1 year that I did that, but it was a lot. And I didn't get paid much because back then babysitters didn't make a lot of money. I had this one friend, and she might even see this video. Her name was Kim as well, and we were besties. And she would go every year with me and my family. Our family trek. I know I've told stories before where Disneyland was our family trek until we got into boating. And then the boating was our family thing. And we would take the boat up to the San Juan Islands, which is in the northern Puget Sound up near Canada. And we'd usually spend a couple weeks up there at a time. And she would come every single year. And we would have so much fun. One year we were in Victoria, BC, Canada. And if you've ever been there or seen it, they have a beautiful inlet right there in front of the Empress Hotel and in front of Parliament. And the boats come in and we would stay there, and they have street performers and all this kind of thing. Well, the Princess Marguerite goes in. I don't even know if that's still around. The Princess Marguerite would go in and out of there. It was like a big ship ferry thing. And one year, we, being unsupervised as usual, we're Gen X kids. We got in the skiff, which at the time was an 11-foot Boston whaler, and I think it had a 25 horse on it, which it would move right along. And she was in the bow, and I was driving, of course, and we went out into the strait, and we're jumping the Princess Marguerite wake, which was massive in that little 11-foot skiff. And I swear to this day, no exaggeration, that we caught air, and that prop was out of the water as we jumped that wave, and she squealed and screamed, and we still talk about it to this day, jumping those Princess Marguerite waves, and then meeting all the Canadian boys and hanging out with them at the dock. And it was great summers. My dad used to put us on the bow in our bikinis. This is when we were like 16, 17, you know, and we'd pull into Roach Harbor, which was back then a real ritzy kind of a, you know, a place to stay on San Juan Island. And they had dock boys, or the boys that would, you know, help dock the yachts coming in and stuff. And back in the day, a 46-foot Gris was a pretty decent sized boat. You know, they've gotten bigger over the years. My husband and I had a 60-footer, but we would pull in and we'd be on the bow and, you know, flirting with the boys to get a good spot. And, you know, it was just a different life. It was a different world. But her and I had so much fun on those trips. And she might even see this video and remember it. Now, living on the boat, it isolated me quite a bit, which honestly wasn't horrible because, like I said, I was always kind of a loner. But it probably saved me a lot too, because so we lived in Tacoma, and our house, like I said, was about 35-40 minutes from there, and that was a different school district. That was the Puyallup School District. And because when we first moved on the boat, we thought we were going right back, and so my parents didn't change schools. They thought, oh, well, we'll be going back in a few months. And I just kept going to the Puyallup School District, and my mother would drive me, and then eventually I started riding the city bus, and then eventually, another story of a friend. Eventually, by the time I got towards the end of junior high, just before high school, there was a kid that moved on a boat. Him and his dad moved here from California. They lived on their boat on a couple docks over, and for some reason he was going to the Puyallup School District too, and so we would carpool back and forth, and he got his license a year before I did, so I would ride with him, and you know, but it was a long trek. It was a 45-minute drive to school, you know, pretty close to that depending on traffic. So that isolated me a little bit from the goings-on in the old neighborhood and the school parties and things like that. Now, once I got my own car, I wasn't quite as isolated, but up to that point, it kept me pretty isolated from the crowds at school that maybe were getting into trouble or doing things they shouldn't be doing, because I wasn't there. I couldn't be around it. You know, I just was too far away to get there. My parents were going to drive me, and so I didn't do sports or anything like that because it was just too much to get back and forth. So that isolated me a little bit, but on the same flip, it probably saved me from getting in a lot of trouble too, because once I did get the car and was able to get back and forth by myself, I was looking for trouble. I was a Gen X kid. I was looking for trouble. In fact, that's another story. So my dad was a mechanic. This is going to get totally off track here. My dad was a mechanic, and he had 3 girls. So he bought each of us our first car, but we had to get it running. So my first car was a 1972 Chevy LeBus pickup, and he picked it up for just a couple $100 or something, but the engine was bad. So we spent the summer before I got my license rebuilding the engine. I helped him, you know, and he was teaching me everything. And back then I knew things about cars. Now I don't, but back then I did. And we rebuilt the engine. Well, while we were working on my truck to get, no, it wasn't the summer before I got my license. It was right after I got my license, because I was driving. Yeah, okay. Chemo brain. So, I was driving his Chevy LeBus, which was like an 81, and it was diesel. I remember I was so excited about a diesel truck. And I was driving that back and forth to school because I just got my license while we were working on building my gas engine in my Chevy LeBus. So anyway, the truck gets done. I'm so excited. I'm going to take it out for the first time. I'm all excited. I'm going out Friday night. Back in the day in Puyallup, we used to be able to cruise the loop. So think of American Graffiti. Kind of the same idea. We had this loop downtown where you could just cruise around all night long and see all your friends and honk, and you know, just it was just a party. Well, they stopped all that, you know, regulations. Anyway, so we were going to go down there and cruise the loop. So I stop at the gas station to get gas, because again, I'm 45 minutes to get there. I stopped to get gas, and not paying attention, I put diesel in my truck, because I was used to getting diesel, and I was a girl, and I wasn't thinking straight, and I was just worried about getting where I was going. Well, as soon as I take off, a few miles down the street, it's kind of coughing and sputtering a little bit, and I'm like, oh man, what's up with my truck? I just rebuilt it, it was running great, I don't know, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, anyway, I end up breaking down, and I call my dad, and he comes and gets me and everything. So we end up getting the car towed back to the house, and when he gets to look at it a couple days later, he's taking it all apart. He's like, I don't know what's wrong with it. I don't know what's wrong with it. Finally, he smells the fuel, and he's like, you dingbat. You put diesel in it. He says, good thing it wasn't the other way around. Probably would have blew yourself up. So I never made that mistake again. So anyway, like I said, I lived on the boat with my folks, and there were a lot of hijinks that ensued and things that happened. Once I was in high school, like I said, I was usually looking for trouble, and sometimes I brought the trouble back with me. So there were these two boys that lived on a tugboat just on the other side of the marina, and somehow or another I made friends with them. And we decided we were going to have a boat party because their folks were going to be out of town and my folks were going to be out of town. So even then I was an entrepreneur. So I made all these flyers. I don't remember where I got to print them off at. Somehow or another we got someone to get a keg. I knew some kids in a band. Anyway, we ended up setting this thing up, and I'm sitting at the gate at the top of the ramp, and the tugboat's down at the end of the pier. And I am collecting the money because we're going to make some money off this deal, right? We're going to pay the band, we're going to cover the keg, and we're each going to make some money. So I'm at the top of the gate, and I'm collecting $3 a head. Well, somebody calls the cops. I don't know who called the cops. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't call the cops. There was a band which carries across the water and all these cars and kids, because we had handed out flyers at my high school in Puyallup, which had a graduating class of 500. And then they had handed out flyers at their high school, which was Stadium High School, which was just as big, if not bigger. And hundreds of kids showed up. And I'm collecting the money, and the cops show up. So the cops come over, and I wasn't drinking. That was one time I was not doing anything wrong because I wanted to collect the money. I wanted to be on my game. So they come up and they're like, what's going on? You got a party going on down there? And I'm like, yeah, just a little gathering. I'm just keeping it straight. And they're like, are you drinking? No, sir, I'm not drinking. Is there drinking down there? Yeah, maybe. I think they might have some booze down there. I'm not sure. I'm just up here. I was told to collect the money. I just play stupid, right? So anyway, the cops go down, break it up, and everybody leaves. And meanwhile, while the cops are already down there, there's people coming, still showing up for this party, and I'm still collecting money because I'm like, I gotta get it while I can. We ended up being able to cover the band, cover the keg, and we each got a few bucks. I don't remember, maybe $50 a piece or something. But back then, that was a lot of money. So that was fun. But that was my entrepreneurial spirit before I even opened my first business. But then the day came when I was getting married, August 2nd, 1986. Married my high school sweetheart, and I had to move off the boat. And it was a very, very sad day for me. I remember gathering all my belongings in black garbage bags because I didn't have luggage. And, I didn't have a lot of stuff either because I lived in an itty bitty tiny little stateroom on a boat, but loading them up in my truck and taking them to our house that we were going to live in, and just tears coming down my eyes. And my parents never saw that because I can't remember if they either weren't home or maybe they were still in bed. I think I was leaving early that morning, the day of the wedding. That's what it was. I think I was leaving real early that morning so that I would be all moved into the place when we got done with the wedding. And it was sad. I missed those days. My husband and I, later in life, when our kids were 8 and 10, ended up living on a boat for a couple of years with them on Lake Union in Seattle. And they didn't take to it like I did. I truly enjoyed living on the boat. They, by then, I think they just enjoyed having their friends and their stuff too much. And live aboard wasn't allowed as much and wasn't as popular, and so there was only like one other kid on the dock, and they just felt very isolated, and it didn't work for them. It worked for me because I was a loner. It didn't work for them because they're social butterflies. But anyway, that's the story of me growing up on a boat. If you've got an interesting childhood or something different, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Have a good one.